Freddie Foreman is one of the most notorious figures in British organised crime. A central player in London's underworld from the 1950s through the 1980s, Foreman gained a reputation as a ruthless enforcer, a skilled robber, and a man who knew how to keep his mouth shut. His name has become synonymous with violence, secrecy, and the strict code of honour that once governed gangland Britain. Welcome back to Crime Chronicles. Stay tuned as we look at a man who is often referred to as the Godfather of British crime. His story is one of poverty, survival, ambition, and ultimately, notoriety. During his rise to power, he was involved in some of Britain's most infamous crimes, and with some of the most high-profile criminals. Foreman was associated with major criminal operations, including armed robbery, extortion, and even contract killings. Unlike some of his contemporaries, who faded into obscurity or met brutal ends, Foreman managed to outlive the violent world he once ruled. Even after his criminal career ended, he remained a prominent figure in popular culture, discussing his past in books, documentaries, and interviews. Freddie Foreman was born on March 5th of 1932 in Battersea, South London. He grew up in a working-class family during a time of economic hardship. His childhood was shaped by the devastation of World War II, particularly the Blitz, which left London in ruins. The war created an environment where crime flourished. Black markets thrived, and young men, unable to find legitimate work, often turned to illegal activities for survival, and Foreman was no exception. Like many boys from rough London neighbourhoods, he quickly learned that crime offered a way out of poverty. He started small, committing petty thefts and burglaries, but his sharp mind and natural leadership qualities allowed him to climb the ranks of London's underworld. By his late teens, he had already established a reputation as someone who could be relied upon to get things done, whether that meant stealing, smuggling, or using violence when necessary. In the 1950s and 1960s, London was experiencing a rise in organised crime, with powerful gangs controlling different parts of the city. Freddie Foreman was heavily involved in armed robbery, fencing stolen goods, and running protection rackets. Unlike some gangsters who operated purely on intimidation, Foreman had a strategic mind and preferred to plan his criminal enterprises carefully. One of his most infamous early crimes was a series of bank raids and security van heists. These were highly organised operations that required detailed planning, reliable contacts, and the ability to execute plans with precision. Foreman's ability to stay ahead of law enforcement made him one of the most respected criminals of his era. Freddie Foreman is best known for his association with the infamous Kray twins, Ronnie and Reggie. The Krays controlled much of London's East End during the 1960s, running protection rackets, nightclubs, and engaging in violent retribution against rivals. While Foreman was not a core member of the Kray organization, he was close to them and often carried out jobs on their behalf. One of the most notorious crimes linked to Foreman was the 1967 murder of Jack the Hat McVitie. McVitie, a small-time criminal, had angered the Krays by failing to carry out a hit and then disrespecting them. The twins decided to kill him, and while Reggie Kray delivered the fatal stab wounds, Foreman was reportedly involved in disposing of the body. Though he denied direct involvement for years, many believe he played a crucial role in covering up the murder. Like many alliances in the London underworld of the 1960s, Foreman's relationship with the Krays was based on mutual respect. He was seen as someone who could be trusted, a rare quality in the violent and treacherous world of organised crime. However, when the Krays were arrested and sentenced to life in prison in 1969, the landscape of London's criminal underworld began to shift. By the 1970s and 1980s, Foreman had established himself as one of Britain's top criminals. He was linked to several high-profile heists, including the infamous Brink's-Mat robbery of 1983. The Brink's-Mat heist involved the theft of £26 million worth of gold bullion, cash and diamonds from a warehouse at Heathrow Airport. It was one of the largest robberies in British history. While Foreman was not directly linked to the robbery itself, he was believed to have had connections to those involved. The stolen gold had to be laundered through various criminal networks, and given Foreman's extensive underworld ties, it is widely speculated that he played a role in its distribution. In addition to large-scale heists, Foreman continued to be involved in contract killings, armed robberies, and extortion. His ability to avoid police detection was remarkable, as many of his contemporaries were either jailed or killed. Despite his ability to evade law enforcement for years, it was inevitable that Foreman would eventually face justice. In the 1970s, he was sentenced to 9 years in prison for handling stolen goods and conspiracy charges. However, his most significant legal battle came in 1989, when he was convicted of the 1966 murder of Frank Mad Axeman Mitchell. Mitchell, a violent criminal, had escaped from Dartmoor prison with the help of the Krays. Initially, the plan was to use him as leverage with the authorities, but when he became too unstable, the decision was made to kill him. Foreman was accused of helping to dispose of Mitchell's body, and although he denied any involvement, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. By the time he was released in the late 1990s, the world of organized crime had changed significantly. Many of his old associates were dead or imprisoned, and new criminal syndicates had taken over. Unlike many gangsters who disappear after their criminal careers end, Foreman embraced his infamy. He published several books, including his autobiography, Respect, The Life of Freddie Foreman, in which he detailed his experiences in London's underworld. He also appeared in documentaries and interviews, openly discussing his past. Unlike some criminals who downplay their actions, Foreman was surprisingly candid, admitting to his involvement in various crimes, but maintaining that he followed a strict moral code. In his later years, he attempted to distance himself from crime, instead focusing on sharing his story. He became a popular figure in British gangster folklore, with some seeing him as a remnant of an old-school criminal era, one where loyalty and honor still existed. Freddie Foreman remains one of the most controversial figures in British criminal history. To some, he is a hardened gangster, responsible for multiple violent crimes. To others, he is a charismatic and intelligent man who did what was necessary to survive in a brutal world. His willingness to discuss his past, combined with his longevity, has made him a compelling figure in crime history. Even though he left behind his life of crime, Foreman's story continues to fascinate. His legacy is one of violence, power, and survival. He outlived many of his contemporaries, including the Kray twins, and remained an influential figure even in his later years. His ability to adapt and his willingness to talk about his past have made him a compelling character in the history of British organised crime. Thank you for joining us today on Crime Chronicles. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the channel with your friends.